Okay, welcome to Into the Channel, a podcast primarily about women's football. Before we hit the pitch, if you enjoy the show or love women's football as much as we do, come kick it with us already. Subscribe and follow on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you like to watch or listen. Leave us a review over at your favorite podcast app, and there are links to all of our socials in the show notes of this episode. As many of you have likely already noticed, I am not your host, Dino DeCespedes. Our guy is out being a good father and upstanding citizen, but that's okay because this episode will be carried by two Seattleites. I am, however, your co-host Grant Engel, and I am feeling fantastic because our guest today is an experienced and successful communications professional who has been writing about football for more than a decade. Whether it was covering the team as Seattle Reign FC, then just Reign FC, then OL Reign, back to Seattle Reign FC, or watching the team go from Memorial Stadium in the shadow of the Space Needle downtown, or about 40 miles south down at Cheney Stadium in Tacoma, or back up to Lumen Field in Soto, she is an NWSL media OG. And on a personal note, one of the many writers up here who has been uncommonly kind to me when I showed up to cover the team last season. You can read her outstanding work on Sounder at Heart, the incredible Seattle football news site that covers Seattle Reign FC, as well as the name suggests, the Seattle Sounders of the MLS. It is an honor and privilege to welcome to the program, Susie Rantz.
Thank you so much. Hearing you read that all, I have been through a lot, haven't I?
lot of years. I always appreciate you guys telling me the war stories of all the different stadiums that you've been through. Obviously, Susie, welcome to the show. We are here to talk about our home club, Seattle Reign FC. So let's just get this out of the way. Last year didn't go great. Fourth fewest goals scored in the league. Most goals allowed in the league, which was kind of surprising when I went back to look at it and remind myself of that. They ended up with the third worst goal differential in the league. In a nutshell, what happened?
Yeah, it's really hard to pinpoint it on one thing. It was such a frustrating year because it felt like actually for the whole year, the team was like close. And in fact, most of their games that they lost by one goal. There were only a few where they didn't lose by more than one goal. I think there were multiple factors. One of them, I'm sure people have talked about quite a bit, but the club was put up for sale in April of 2023. Mm-hmm. And there was so much uncertainty heading into the 2024 season. Just first of all, it sounds like if the club was even going to stay in Seattle. Second of all, when the new ownership would be transitioned, and it took until June for that sale to be complete. And so when you talk about resources in the offseason, when you talk about investing in staff to provide the players the best training environment, all of those things were really delayed until the middle of the season. And it's really hard for an ownership group to just jump in the middle of the season. And even if like they worked really hard to protect the players from that, it's got to be in the back of your mind, I feel like, right? Like Sure. It was a tough year all around. And then losing Megan Rapinoe, losing Rose Lavelle, losing Emily Sonnet, losing Angelina in free agency, who was like a midfielder who was really poised for the future with the club. That's obviously really hard to replace in an instant. And especially with ownership uncertainty, even harder to convince people, I think, to come to the club. So certainly that hurt. This was still, though, a good team on paper. A team that should have been able to compete on paper. And like you said, like a club that has historically been one of the best defensive clubs in the league for its existence, essentially. And so to see them struggle so bad there was really frustrating. Going back and looking at some of the stats and looking at the season, they just gave up a lot of early goals and they were always chasing games. And that is so hard to come back from in this league, in a league that really tactically smart, really athletic players. You go down a goal and it's really hard to come from behind. Credit to the team. They fought a lot in those games, but that's something they obviously have to clean up for this year. I said there wasn't a lot, and then I just listed a lot.
I mean, I couldn't agree more. I mean, you nailed it. I mean, we were there for so many of the home matches. Obviously, we cover the club closely. I think you nailed it. It's spot on. You know, losing Rapinoe, Angelina, Rose Lavelle, Emily Sonnet, especially you mentioned the defense. Losing Sonnet back there, I know she wasn't with the club long, but the combination of when they had matches where Sonnet and Quinn was out there with the back line, they were so hard to score on. Obviously, they made it all the way to the final the year prior.
Yeah. I was actually really pleasantly surprised at how big of an impact Emily Sonnet had with the club in 2023. Moving to, I mean, she's traditionally center back and moving to holding midfield. She's so athletic, covers so much ground, and just like so tenacious defensively that it freed up Quinn to do a lot more in the midfield as well. So yeah, losing that and not having immediate replacements because free agency is still new to this league and players took some time to make decisions, and the club was still obviously trying to keep Rose and Emily, and they didn't really go to Gotham until January or just maybe it was December. So that's all like just really hard timing, I think, too.
For sure. Okay, we've done our retrospective. There's no need to live in the past any longer.
Yes.
Let's talk about some of these significant acquisitions. I think I'd like to start with Madison Curry, somebody who you brought up at the first training camp when you were talking to Laura Harvey. Madison Curry for Angel City FC, I thought she was dynamite. Laura Harvey mentioned it as well. I love to look at this stat on the great statistics website, FBref, Football Reference, that has this scouting report statistic where it compares women's players to the top 9 leagues. It's like the Champions League, NWSL, Premier League in France, et cetera, et cetera. And it goes over the last 365 days. When you look at Madison Curry's scouting report, she is in the 99th percentile of fullbacks amongst those leagues in tackles and clearances per 90 minutes. She's in the 96th percentile in blocks, 95th percentile in interceptions. She had a great year. What are you looking forward from her? What have you seen in her game? How do you think she's going to help this backline?
Yeah, she's one of those like NWSL hidden gem success stories because she was like a 4th round draft pick in the last year of the draft, the college draft from Princeton. So like a little bit of like an unknown, untapped resource. And like you mentioned, she had such a breakout rookie season. She dominated, like she led every stat for Angel City's defensive line that you just listed. She's quick, so someone who can get up and down the line really quickly. Like you mentioned, like can get stuck in on tackles really, really, I thought made like really smart recovery runs. If she made a mistake, she like learned really quickly and you saw her adapt in games. And I don't think for Angel City, she was like a huge crosser. So it's still kind of a question mark if she's going to play fullback, what her role might be there. But in addition to so many players on the Reign back line now, she's got versatility. She can kind of play on both sides, right, left side, and played center back some for Angel City. So it's nice to have someone who you can plug in based on what the team needs and opponent needs. So I'm really excited. She's still so young and has such a long future, but seems like someone who could plug in on the starting lineup from day one.
I think so. I got to imagine that's the goal from Laura Harvey. And we can't talk about the acquisitions without talking about the NWSL's all-time leading goal scorer, formerly Lynn Williams, now, as you confirmed on Media Day when I believe it was your question to Lynn, Lynn Biyendolo, formerly of Gotham FC, acquired by Reign FC via trade. I think people have seen her with the national team, obviously. You've seen what she's done in the league from, Gotham FC, the Courage, back to Western New York Flash. I feel like people know what to expect, but what did you kind of get from Lynn at Media Day, or even more broadly, kind of what are you seeing as she comes to the squad?
I know that this was the first thing that Lauren Barnes and Laura Harvey referenced, and it's not necessarily represented in her personal stats, but her teams win. Yep. She has, 3 NWSL shields, 4 NWSL championships. She's won with the U.S. national team. And there's while obviously it's a team effort, to have someone who has that kind of pedigree and like knows what it takes to win, and has been a big factor in those wins, I think maybe is an underrated part that the stats don't show. The things that I've heard about Lynn, and even just like us getting the chance to meet her for the opening of the preseason, she just seems like a teammate that everyone really respects, looks up to. She called herself a silent leader, but that can be like some of the most powerful, leading by example in training every day. And then like on the field, we obviously haven't gotten a chance to see her play with the Reign, but she's just one of the best defensive pressing forwards in the world.
Yep.
And like you mentioned, FBref, if you look at her defensive numbers, they're probably in the 99th percentile for forwards. And Laura Harvey, this was one thing that the team got away from a little bit last year, but her teams typically are really high pressing teams that know how to make it really difficult to break down high and transition. And having someone like Lynn Williams be able to do that is going to be really exciting. I feel like I could list a lot more, but the one other thing she mentioned that I think she's obviously going to bring to this team too is her speed and her ability to stretch defenses, which is not something the Reign have had for the last couple of years. And like she mentioned, even if she's not the option, or even if the team doesn't find her, she's pulling the defense for her teammates. And I'm really excited to see how they're able to take advantage of that.
For sure. I think one thing that just kept sticking out to me is, and I know the like you mentioned, the Reign traditionally have not had this for the past few years, but there were just so many matches where everything was so compact in the Reign's attacking third. There was just no space to do anything. And then that would always, like Jess Fishlock is known for as a defensive midfielder or even a holding midfielder who can hit those balls over the top to kind of unlock a defense. But defenses never really had to be that afraid of that option. Now with Lynn Williams back there, they absolutely have to respect that.
Yeah. I'm super excited.
Definitely will be exciting to see. All right, next, let's talk about Dino and I always raise our hand. We try to watch as much football as we possibly can. It is difficult to track women's collegiate football.
Yeah.
It is just, it's hard to find. We all have day jobs. It's kind of hard to track. What do you know about the two young players fresh out of college, Maddie Dalian and Emily Mason?
Yeah, I got to watch Maddie a little bit more intentionally because she was part of the Under-20 Women's World Cup last year, along with Reign players Emeri Adames and Jordyn Bugg, often coming off the bench. And one thing you will probably notice really quickly if you watch any clips of hers or highlights, she is really freaking fast.
Yes.
She is one of Minnesota's like all-time fastest high school track athletes. So just to emphasize, really freaking fast. But she's really always looking to get end line and can beat defenders a lot. But if you watch some of her college clips or any of her U20 clips, she's also really smart about like where she puts the ball in when she's crossing. It's not just a kind of hopeful cross, cutbacks, lots of cutbacks, smart crosses for teammates. So she played a little wing back in college, so her stats may not like really truly represent a winger, and really just had a breakout year this year. And it sounds like multiple teams were really trying to get her. So the Reign are lucky to have kind of that additional speed and to have someone like Lynn Williams to see as a teammate, get advice from. It seems like they play very similar styles. It's going to be really exciting. Emily Mason was a defender at Rutgers who has experience at center back and fullback, similar to all the back line, it seems like now.
Yep.
She actually was called up by Laura Harvey in 2020 for the Under-20 World Cup when Laura Harvey was the U20 coach. And that was when Emily Mason was just in like 17 years old and still in high school.
Wow.
Played a lot of the CONCACAF qualifiers, but then because of COVID, the World Cup got canceled. So you didn't get to see her there, but she played in the 2020 Under-20 World Cup in 2022. She's tall and seems like a defender who can use those long legs to tackle, close down on opponents. I don't know. I wouldn't say as much about her, but I think knowing that she got training experience with Laura Harvey, she's seen her in action, means that I think there's a lot of trust there from her.
I believe it. And like you said, just fits that mold perfectly. Where do you want to place me on the back line? Okay, I can play there. It seems like Laura seems to really value that.
Yeah.
Speaking of Laura Harvey, both her and Lou Barnes mentioned Ainsley McCammon by name in their media availability on Monday. You also mentioned Emeri Adames, Jordyn Bugg. We're talking about three teenagers here, and I don't say that like in a flippant way. I mean, they are superlative talents. That's how they make it into this league. But they're still teenagers. How much do you think a team in the NWSL can rely on athletes that young to get wins in this current season? Or is it more of just a long-term development play?
I think it's a little bit of a mixture of both. And Laura has been really clear that the team only chose to do this when they felt like they had the infrastructure to be able to support the development of players like this. And she even mentioned in her press conference talking about Maddie Darlene and the other young players. Like they see this as a 5-year development plan for them. And each one is on a different path. So we saw last year Jordyn Bugg get signed and then immediately slot in at center back, which is just amazing of any position to put a 17-year-old center back and just killed it, right? She was so calm, so poised. So I think you can expect her opportunities this year to probably be pretty significant just based on what we saw from her last year.
Yeah.
And then saw someone like Emeri who sometimes started, sometimes came off the bench, didn't have as many minutes, but Laura talked about like not, they weren't winning and not wanting to put up pressure on her in her first season in pros and like focusing on what might be best for her in her development. I think she's also obviously poised to get more minutes, but might not be a starter every time. She's still so young and now there's a lot of talent on the front line.
Yeah.
And Ainsley to me is like the big question mark because we didn't get to see her much last year. She captained the under-17 team in the World Cup and led them to bronze. She just got called up for the U.S. women's national team futures camp. So that's like, I think, a huge signal of the talent that everyone sees in her. But playing a holding midfield position, that's also a lot of pressure to put on someone young.
Yeah.
So it'll be really interesting to see what her minutes look like. I think the club overall is focusing on a development pathway that sets them up for long-term success, which means they have to play minutes for them to see what they look like in a professional environment, but also means that they may all be on different trajectories.
Yeah, I think that's perfectly stated. I mean, yeah, Jordyn Bugg, I think, blew everybody away. Being able to handle the physicality at that age, at that position, you think it should be a similar hill for Ainsley McCammon to kind of climb as well. Just like you think about, we mentioned Quinn earlier. You just think about how tough Quinn is and their ability to, outbody and just outposition players. It's hard to do that in this league, especially. And I think what you mentioned about Emeri Adames, she has just such a clever touch. She is one of those footballers that's just like, I'll just nick the ball away from you when you run at me. It's going to be really interesting to see. I think you're dead on. I think she'll be that kind of super sub. Come on, change the speed, whether it's like 65 minutes in, 70 minutes in. I'm really excited to see her kind of take more advantage of that as the season progresses.
Yeah, and the word came up from Laura Harvey a couple times at a training this week, which was unpredictability.
Yeah.
And having Maddie Darlene, having Emeri Adames, like to have them come on potentially as subs, or maybe they start some games against certain opponents, but to have a variety in the attack, like you mentioned, there were so many times when teams would play a high line against the rain because they knew they could, which condensed the field, which meant only way they could get around you is by combining. And if they couldn't, that was really difficult. And so now to have a lot of different options, I'm just really excited to see how it comes together.
Absolutely. We talked about the new acquisitions. Is there anybody outside? Who have I forgot to mention outside of Madison Curry or Lynn Williams? Or do you have a wild card? Is there a player that you're like, okay, we're going into this season, I'm really excited to see where they fit in, how they play?
I am really intrigued to see more of Sam Meza. Was a player that they drafted last year and during the preseason looked like kind of defying expectations and looked like such a dynamic midfielder. And she apparently had an illness that really set her back and other things that the club hasn't really dove into, which means like, don't ask, I think. And then she wasn't getting playing time and they loaned her to a USL Super League club, Dallas Trinity. And she had such a great half season with them. And I saw kind of on one of the USL Super League's posts that she was one person that one of like the commentators nominated for MVP of the first half of the season for the league. So what I have loved from the small time we've gotten to see Sam Meza is like, she's so quick on closing down defensively in the midfield, so tenacious, is going to run her butt off for you. And I think just needed game time. And so I think this was hopefully a situation where a loan works out really positively for a player like her. And she's really poised to have a breakout season with the Reign. I don't know if that means she's starting all the time. I don't know what that looks like in terms of appearances, but there's more opportunities in the midfield now with some players departing. So really excited to see what she can do.
Yeah, that's a great shout out. They take her in the draft out of UNC. I think people were anxious to see her play. And then, as you mentioned, all those circumstances, we really don't get to see her on an NWSL pitch. But that actually leads perfectly into the next question. So kind of with her returning to the squad from loan, as you mentioned, and we talked about all these other additions, these young players. In your experience, as I mentioned, you've been covering the club for a while. Is it fair to say that players need a little time to learn Laura Harvey's system? Do you think they might pick it up fairly quickly? Is it a normal amount of time? Am I overthinking this? Do I have any idea what I'm talking about? What do you think when you think, okay, a player's dropping into Laura Harvey's system, the lead time for them to get it is what?
Yeah, great question. I do think I think Laura is really a details kind of coach, and observing the team, it's clear to see like the style of play that they like to play. They build out of the back. They rely on long balls to get the ball up to their front line and like to combine from there in the midfield and like to cross the ball because they're dangerous crossing the ball. So like those components are pretty easy to understand, but like what does it mean? How do I know what to look for to break down opponents? What does our press look like? Because Laura does focus a ton on defense from the front to the back.
Yeah.
And I think those components take a lot more time to figure out. In fact, Laura mentioned last year with Emeri Adames that she would often be so hyper-focused on her defensive responsibilities that when she was on the wing, she'd drop back a lot, which meant when they got the ball, she had to transition a lot further.
Yep.
And training a player to like find that sweet spot can take some time. Some players do it more instinctively or have more professional experience. So I think like they have like 2 months of preseason almost. I think that's such great time. And the fact that the roster is a lot more settled at this point than it was last year, that most players will have that a lot of that time with Laura and the team, I think is really helpful. I also think in years past, aside from last year, they added the Challenge Cup coming out of the pandemic and trying that so that they would always open the season with this like mini preseason tournament that didn't count as regular season, that Laura just thrived in that environment because she got to play players under like lower stakes and help them figure out what it meant to kind of play in the system. And she doesn't have that this year, but they are getting some more preseason games in this year than they did last year. And I think that'll be really helpful.
Yeah, for sure. You got to think with somebody who's just a known genius like Laura Harvey, the more time and then the more on-field in competition reps that she gets to coach the players up, you got to think that should be somewhat of an advantage for the club.
Yeah.
Okay, we're getting to the end here. You've been extremely generous with your time. Speaking of Laura Harvey, I got a scenario for you. There's a match tonight. Laura Harvey and the coaching staff are stuck in I-5 traffic. Laura calls you and says, Susie, I need you to manage the squad tonight. The players are already there. I need you to set the 11. Pressure's on. You get down to the sideline. You've got to fill out the team sheet as the roster stands today in mid-January. You don't have to name me the full 11. I think I maybe went a little overboard with this question. But if you think about it, who are the players that you absolutely have to get in there in the starting lineup?
Okay, this is tough. This is tough because I think one thing that this roster is set up well is that they are like in most positions 1-2 players deep in every spot, which is what you want for building a roster, right? So I'm going to say on the front line, I'm starting shocker Lynn Williams. We know Jordyn Bugg is currently right now the starting center forward. I'm going to put Anna Maria Crnogorcevic on the right wing because I think she's a really good hold-up player. She's really good in possession, provides that nice balance. I think you can rotate a lot there, but that's what I'm going to start with.
Sure.
In the midfield, I'm going to get a little spicy. I don't know this is what Laura Harvey is going to do, but I'm going to start Jess Fishlock as a holding midfielder alongside G and Narilia Mondesir.
Yes.
We didn't get to see her as much last year, but as she was like, she came mid-season, took some time to get familiar with the club. So fun to watch when she was like really thriving at the end of the season. So it's a more attacking-minded midfield, but we're rolling with it because we want to play exciting soccer.
Exactly.
And the back line, I think, is where there's just like a ton of wait and see because there is so much flexibility. I'm going to put, just based on who was maybe starting it last year, I'm going to put Madison Curry, Phoebe McClernon, Jordyn Bugg, and I'm going to start with Hannah Glass at right back, but we'll see what kind of competition she has before Sofia Huerta returns from her loan.
There we go.
I think Claudia Dickey has the starting role right now in goals. She has for the last season and a half, but it's really exciting to have new goalkeeper Cassie Miller from the trade with Gotham, who I think could always push for that starting position and has a lot of experience.
All right, that's what I'm talking about.
What do you think about my lineup?
No, absolutely great. Coco Mondesir, as you mentioned, instantly excited when she came to the club from Montpellier over in the Premier League in France. And you were right. At the end of the season, she had those flashes. She's 26 years old. She's kind of entering her physical prime. She just had flashes where it was like, oh boy, this player might be dynamite out there in the attack.
Yeah. And they played with a little more of attack-minded midfield toward the end of the season, sometimes with mixed results. And some of it was just because, the regular season or the postseason was out of their grasp. So why not have some fun? But yeah, I'm excited to see a full season with her.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, Anna Maria Crnogorcevic, AMC, as she is called on this show sometimes. Yeah, totally right. I think she can drift back into midfield. She is good on the ball. She had a good chemistry with G, like right away. It felt like when she stepped on into the team mid-season. So yeah, I can't argue with the 11. I feel like maybe Laura would say, hey, how about a little more defensive minded? But I think the team the team was in good hands under
you were stuck in traffic, Laura.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, you should have left earlier. You got to know by now. I-5 is terrible.
I do think, historically, for the last few years, Laura has kind of played a double pivot holding midfield or two more defensive midfielders. And a player we haven't really talked about, but who I think, if she can stay healthy for the whole year, because has missed some time in the last couple of seasons, is Olivia van der Yacht. And I think if she can, she's one of those wins every duel. Really kind of keeps it simple in possession, which means you keep the ball, which is keeping the ball in the midfield is really valuable. So I could see her starting. It's been a while since we've been able to see her play. So
no, that's a great call. I would love to see Olivia van der Yacht and Ryan Brown really kind of, and it's just bad luck at this point, but to see them stay healthy, I think that would be a huge plus for the club this season.
Yeah, it was such a bummer. Ryan Brown's injury came right as she was breaking out. And
she was playing so well.
So unfair.
Yeah. These sports, sometimes the sports gods are not kind to us or the athletes. But it's all right. We'll see how it works out this season. Like I said, Susie, you've been incredibly generous with your time. Thank you for coming on the show. Was there anything from Media Day or anything recent that I missed that you would like us to cover?
I think one thing that just stood out from Media Day in terms of comments, and some of it is intangible, and hopefully we see more of it over this season, is just how much Laura Harvey emphasized how different this offseason was and how invested the new ownership group has been in terms of just being present and listening and setting goals and being seen by the players, being seen by the staff, making sure that they have the surround sound staff that they need to let the players just focus on soccer and focus on performance, which I think they weren't really able to do last year. And it's hard to explain. It's hard to see because we're not there every day. But Lauren Barnes, Leslie Gallmore, the general manager, when I talked to her a couple of weeks ago, and Laura Harvey have just spoken about how quickly and how impactful the new ownership group has been. I'm excited to see what that looks like over the full season. Yeah,
that is a great shout because like you said, people talk about culture all the time in sports and you don't know. And obviously we saw last year, the team just kept chugging along as they endured some losing streaks. They weren't playing well at times. But they were, like you mentioned earlier, they were in the vast majority of these games. That felt like the Laura Harvey culture, the insulation of the locker room established by Jess Fishlock and Lou Barnes, your vets who were able to hang tough in there. But now we get to zoom out and say, okay, well, how much does this wider, collective ownership group, how does that really play into things? So I think that's a really good call.
We shall see. I'm excited for the season. It's getting close.
Big thank you again to today's guest, Susie Rantz of Sounder at Heart, for joining the show and always being ready to step in for Laura Harvey and put together a starting 11 when needed. I appreciate you, Susie.
Thank you.
Okay. Great interview. Really, really, really enjoyed it. Great intel from Susie Rantz from Sounder at Heart. Props to you for emceeing the whole affair.
Sure. I tried. Yes, I appreciate that.
Anything else we need to know from Seattle training camp?
It was cold out there. You could tell the players were cold. Lynn Biyendolo. Let's all get used to saying that. Instead of Lynn Williams, yep. Lynn Biyendolo. She had referenced how cold it was, but people seem to be in good spirits. The facility has like several pitches around it. It's called Starfire Sports Complex in beautiful Tukwila, Washington, just south of Seattle. And there was a youth tournament going on in the surrounding fields. So there were boys clubs and girls clubs playing on there. And so it was only youth academy players, I think some season ticket holders and media were allowed like on the training field where the Reign were playing. But when they left, you could see when Lynn Williams left the area, just a swarm of young people, boys and girls, ran right up to her, super excited. She was absolute class, signing footballs, signing boots, signing shirts, people taking pictures with her. Like you could tell some of the parents too were just like, don't crowd her too much. Like you could tell they're just like, don't injure her. Like we don't need anything happening here. But yeah, it was super cool to see. I think a bunch of players ran up to Jordyn Bugg as well, a bunch of youngsters, and they were just absolutely classy and took their time with them. It was cool to see on the way out.
I love that. Yeah, no, I think hearing that story, seeing the schedule drop this week, listening to your interview with Susie, I also got a chance to check out the opening of the Orlando Pride's training camp this week as well. Just an exciting time. I think this is like a cool time of year. I don't think we got this last year because I think we were heavy Champions League. I don't think the timing was exactly the same, but we're getting a proper warm up, getting us pumped up, for this regular season. At the Pride's training camp, I did get a chance to hear from Seb Hines, and then I also got a chance to catch up briefly with Kylie Strom. Let's go to that audio here. Kylie, can you talk a little bit about the difference between pursuing the total apex of the sport, winning everything, to now coming back and having to defend, and just the differences in approach between those two?
Yeah, I think last year we had this underdog mentality. I don't know if anybody expected us to do what we did. So I think this year coming in, it's a much different mentality. We are no longer the underdogs, but we want to still play like it. I think we'll have a big target on our back. So it's just a new challenge for us that we have to overcome. We talked about it already in our meetings. We want to prove that last year wasn't luck. I think some people, everybody has their opinions and stuff. So this year we want to stick to our standards, stick to our principles, and prove that we have something special here. It's not a one-off season. We want to do it again. Competition is high in this team, and that's a great team. That's a sign of a great team. That's a sign of a championship team. It's not going to be easy to earn your spot. That's why you have to show up every single day and train to the best of your ability. So we're challenged in training every day, and it's going to be fun.
Personal goals. Do you have any kind of new personal goals this year versus last year?
That's a good question. I feel like that's something I have to think about. I haven't got that far. Yeah, it's a good question. I'm gonna think about it. I think last year a big thing for me was just consistency. I was playing a new position, so I'm just gonna have to keep learning, keep growing, and do whatever I can to help the team.
All right, you know what, buddy? I am pretty thirsty after that interview with Susie. You had to work up some thirst handling Pride training camp. We might as well get to it, I think.
Yeah.
There it is. Sounds like hard work. Just a couple of journalists out here. Cheers to you.
So in the old blood and sweat.
Spilling ink, as it were, as proper journalists we are. I got to say, look, I mean, obviously I heard the audio. I haven't seen the video. Am I crazy? It sounded like Kylie Strom was pretty jovial. It sounded like she was like just happy to be there.
That's exactly what I picked up on in the building. And I'm not sure what to make from it. It's a little sliver. It's a couple slivers of moments that you kind of pick up on, but not the same level of intensity, we'll say, as the post-game pressers from last season that were just ice cold, and they had the feel of like a very hardcore deposition almost, where it was very, very intense. And the vibes in Orlando this week, like you said, they were super jolly. And to me, I had two takeaways. Either it's we're really good and we know something that the rest of the league doesn't, and we're just going to come out and do all of this again, or it's a little bit potentially of like not quite happy to be here, but like sort of like sitting happy with it. And like, we're going to have some time to maybe crank up the intensity. First day of training camp, obviously you don't really expect everybody to be, to the max level.
Right.
But I did take a minor note of it. And I think I'm going to be interested to see Challenge Cup season kicking off, these preseason matchups, what the team looks like. I think if they look a little bit like a good team, that's going to set off a couple of alarm bells. If they just fall right back into, the rhythm and the intensity, obviously then it was a whole lot of nothing. But I did take note of it.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to think about. So the franchise itself, the club, hasn't had much historic success at all. Now they come in here, they have this juggernaut season, they're invincible for a large majority of the season, then they win the double. So yeah, it probably feels good to be back in the building. Now it's just you see how much of that carries over, or how much they have the attitude of let's do it again.
Yeah, and I think I didn't get a chance to ask Seb this, but I'm really curious. Next time I get the opportunity, I'm really curious about the different approach to the season. You can't really come out and be like, hey, we're underdogs, it's our time. Like you can't really come out with the same stuff. You've got to come out with like, hey, all right, we've got to defend this, and everybody's coming for us. Really interested to see how they position themselves, I think, internally, and how they start talking about the mission for this season. Speaking of this season, a little look ahead. So we've got some upcoming shows. Friday, February 7th, we will be live 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific on YouTube to break down all 4 UEFA Women's Champions League quarterfinal matchups. That's Barca, Lyon, Chelsea, Bayern, Arsenal, City, Wolfsburg, Real Madrid. We're going to get 4 matches that shuffle up those 8 teams, and I don't think there's a bad matchup in the bunch. Very excited for that. We'll also be back next week to continue talking about European football. We've got some big WSL matchups this weekend that we'll be back to recap and, kind of continue to keep our finger on the pulse there. And then Liga F, Frauen Bundesliga, they kick back off here in the coming weeks. So yeah, it'll be a little European heavy until we get to the quarterfinals draw. So definitely stick with us if that's your flavor. And then obviously NWSL, you already know it's revving up. Very exciting time in the football calendar. Let's fucking go. Anything I missed?
No, I think that about covers it. I'm, equally excited. We're just pulled in 2 directions, but they're 2 nice directions to be pulled in. The European football is great. The NWSL is great. What's not to like?
Let's go. Well, some good news for you and your brethren. And what's the sister? Is it Sistren? I don't know.
I'm not sure.
Anyways,
nobody knows.
All you city folk got some good news this week. 2023 NWSL MVP Kerolin signs a long-term deal with the Sky Blues. I was happy to break this news to you. Take me through the gamut of emotions that you experienced when you heard the news.
I'm literally walking into a meeting, an important meeting. That's, not like life or death stuff, but one that I need to take very seriously. I'm kind of like getting in the zone. I go to do the check. I feel like the standard move is look at the iPhone, throw on the do not disturb. Are there any little alerts on the text, on the messages app? Open it up. Text from Dino to Cespedes, Kerolin to Manchester City. I simply reply to you, get the fuck out of here, and then enter my meeting. I'm like, okay. I was like, refocus for this meeting, but that is very good news. That's something I didn't expect it, but that is something I was very happy to hear.
Let's go. I'm excited for you. Excited to see that, Kerolin also take this next step. A huge talent at a great time for City, considering all the injuries. And like really like the turning point nature of the season based on where we're at, the WSL starting to slip away. City now down to 4th after the Manchester Derby loss, only halfway through the season. But, those Champions League spots are, invaluable.
Yeah.
And I don't know, a player like Kerolin, so dynamic. What kind of impact do you think she's going to make on the pitch? Or how do you see maybe some of the pieces moving around once she, gets fully revved up?
Yeah, I think it's a good point. That's 3 losses in the league now. I realize this is going to sound like doomsday or like hyperbolic maybe, but I guess for people who've been paying attention over the past few years, winning the league off the table, no shot. You're chasing Chelsea. You're too far behind at this point. They're too much of a juggernaut. But like you said, those Champions League places, I think it's going to be a dogfight for those. But Kerolin is obviously going to help. It's no secret on this program that I am a huge Alba Fugino supporter. the 20-year-old wonder kid from Japan. I think she's looked really good in some spots, and I think in other spots she's looked like a 20-year-old player playing in the WSL for the first time. Kerolin, in her prime, pretty much 25 years old. You mentioned she's the 2023 NWSL MVP. She has good size. She's fast. She has great instincts on the ball. She is a terror on the right wing. Even though in that league derby match versus Manchester United, the defense was disorganized. Kiera Keating made some uncharacteristic mistakes. So I think the defense kind of needs to sort that out. I don't expect Keating to keep making those exact types of mistakes. Player as talented with the ball at her feet as she is. But I think when you drop Kerolin in there, you should be able to stretch the opponent, stretch their defense. They have to respect Kerolin getting in behind them. Bunny Shaw looks like she's coming back here pretty soon. Viv Miedema is already getting playing time. She's kind of ramping up to be on the ascent. I think it's just going to put much more pressure on opponents on their back line, and that should hopefully give Rebecca Knock and kind of that new look defense a little more time and a little more confidence, I think, moving forward.
Yeah, I love that little wrinkle, because now, especially when you think about Champions League warming up, the competition is going to get extremely stiff for City, and you have to imagine City playing a little bit more defense, and to be able to quickly turn defense into offense with a player like Kerolin. Like, her acceleration is so good. Like, so often you see her running alongside somebody and then just blowing right past the defender, even though defender's usually in good position there. She's also stronger than she looks.
Absolutely.
A little bit of a slight frame, but you just can't get her off her spot. Like, I mean, she packs a lot of muscle into that frame. She's a bold chance taker. She finishes with precision. I think she's going to fit in really, really nicely with City. Very excited to see what happens from here.
Yeah, and I like her mindset. I want to give one more thing real quick. So she had some quotes, and obviously you get your standard welcome to the club quotes, introductory quotes. But I like what she had to say here. She said, quote, "I'm so excited to be here. I think there were a lot of reasons why I chose City, and one of those was to play in the Champions League." She went on to say, "I think the players," speaking of the WSL, "are really technical, and the team is compact. I want to be better, to learn different things, to come here to be challenged, and also play against the defenders who will play in the next World Cup in Brazil in 2027. End quote. Expertly done by her to get in a promo for the 2027 World Cup in her home country of Brazil. I respect that. But I just like the idea of her. And I know sometimes with American, NWSL fans, just American football fans in general, sometimes when you talk about the technical differences in player quality in Europe compared to in leagues in America, they can take offense to that. I think it's just a different styles of play, different ethos as you kind of compare the two sides of the pond. So I was just really encouraged by her saying, like, I'm going to have to learn some new stuff when I come over here. I have no doubt that she'll be able to do that.
100%. And speaking of one of those defenders Kerolin might run into at the 27 World Cup, Naomi Girma.
Yeah. What do you say?
Another former San Diego Wave superstar player out the door. Huge boon for Chelsea. We talked quite a bit on this show about how thin things were for them on the defensive side of the ball. Buchanan injury, Millie Bright, what kind of workload you want to put on a player like that at her stage in her career, obviously still at the very top, but you just want to have a little bit more depth, right? Than just 4 or 5 players that have legit Champions League, deep water WSL experience. Naomi Girma is the new world record holder for transfers in the women's game. Very exciting. What are you going to be looking for? Because I think when I think about Girma going to Chelsea, 24 years old, in her prime, pre-prime, however you want to think about that, I kind of see this going one of two ways. Either she shows up at Chelsea, looks like a world beater, she is the moat, that defends the castle, and there's just no breaking through. Or I think we could see a little bit of a learning curve potentially. You're going to think about players like Carolina Graham-Hansen or, the Alessia Russos, or, you think about Lyon. If Chelsea draw Lyon in the semifinals, you've got the Chewingas, you've got Dumornay, you've got Diani. And it's almost like there's 3 different types of ball. There's like national team ball, there's the NWSL style of ball, and now there's the WSL, more general European style of ball. How do you see Girma kind of like entering the league? What do you think this first season is going to be like for her?
I think I'm bullish on it. and I'm going to rely on the evidence from the 2024 Olympics. Now, I realize this is limited time that she had working with Emma Hayes. And I think Triple Espresso, rightfully so, garnered a lot of the headlines from that Olympic tournament. They were unstoppable. The anchor to that team, and we talked about it live in the tournament as we were covering it, was Naomi Girma. She got the attack started. You talk about it all the time, how she kind of pulls the levers and is like the metronome back there. And she can recover if she's out of position, which happens sometimes. I felt like it happened more for San Diego Wave than it ever happened for the U.S. Women's national team. But I think that just that little, and maybe, you could tell me I'm taking from a small sample size. I think I would cop to that. But just that little bit of time so far with Emma Hayes, some of that has to translate to how she's going to play for Chelsea Football Club for obvious reasons. Obviously, Emma Hayes there for several years, but I don't think Sonia Bonpastor, she's put her own spin on the way Chelsea is doing things. It hasn't felt like a complete overhaul though. So I think I'm going to go on the record and say I'm bullish. I'm looking forward to the partnership. If they're going to play four in the back and you have her and Millie back there, her kind of field general style will allow Millie to kind of hang back a little bit, take care of crosses in the box, play a little more physical style back there, and let Naomi start to maneuver some of the chess pieces. And oh, by the way, those chess pieces that she'll be working with are going to be Kat Macario, Lauren James, and Johanna Ritting-Kanerud. Let's fucking go. And by the way, maybe Aaron Cuthbert will show her how to smash a beer can over her head. You never know.
Let's go. How about a little Sandy Baltimore at left back too, as an outlet for Girma?
No, that's great.
I mean, embarrassment of riches. I mean, that's a part of Girma's game that I don't think gets talked about enough. Like her metronome ability, to just distribute the ball. You look at her pass completion percentage in the NWSL. I mean, I think she completed something like 1,500 passes over the season, third in the league, just percentage points behind the top spot, 91.3%. She was also top 3 for non-goalkeepers and short and medium range passes. So, I mean, her distribution's awesome. And I love the Millie Bright pairing because, Millie plays her game, but Girma's a little bit of a game wrecker. I think does cover up for a lot when the ball's just knocking around the box and it's a little bit scramble mode. She does have that short field burst ability to kind of make up ground. Somebody's 3-4 yards away and she's just there in a flash, almost meeting the ball when it gets there. I think that's something that Chelsea maybe doesn't necessarily have right now in the roster. So if she can get to that point by the time the Champions League gets to prime time, I think that makes Chelsea, more than a contender, maybe on even footing with those other two big dogs, Barcelona and Lyon.
The Dino de Cespedes Barcelona disrespect continues. I want to keep beating that drum. When you never disrespect
it's terrible,
them in
man.
any
Why
way.
do you do this to me?
Man, he says Pride would smash him, and now Chelsea's going to beat him.
Oh my God. No. Our guy, shout out to our guy, Omar, who always checks in, who's always checking me at the door whenever I look at Chelsea, whenever I look at Barcelona, any kind of sideways. Shout out to you, Omar. I can always count on you to keep me in check. I want to have a quick sidebar. WSL versus NWSL.
Sure.
The battle of the leagues, the battle of the economic models. Just this week, we saw the 2023 NWSL MVP out the door, leave the NWSL, head over to the United Kingdom. And Mike Watts' best player in the NWSL is now no more. Naomi Girma now at Chelsea. We also can't overlook the fact that both Chelsea and Arsenal are monitoring the Trinity Rodman situation, as is every other, probably 250 other clubs in the world.
Yes.
Do you think that this is maybe a signal for, I don't know, some shifting tides, or what do you think's happening WSL, NWSL wise?
Aston Villa is monitoring the Trinity Rodman situation. No disrespect to Villa. But yeah, I'm glad you put the air quotes around that.
Got to.
It's a great discussion piece. It's fun to talk about. Yeah, it's a coup to bring over Kerolin and then Naomi Girma, two players. Like you talk about Girma pre-prime, entering her prime, Kerolin 25 years old. I don't think we're ever going to really know the answer. The teams are never going to play each other when they're fully in form. Like the European Football League season and the USA summer season, it's hard to compare. I guess there is a little bit. I think we had joked about it with our guy Cam Pope. Shout out to Cam from DAZN. also does work for Manchester United, where he had kind of jokingly referred to allowing a USA team, an NWSL team in the Champions League, as he put it, a wild card, which I think Cam just thought was funny because he's English and just thinks the term wild card is funny. But yeah, I mean, look, I think players are going to go back and forth. And this is where I'm just going to put my labor hat on. I might sound a little obnoxious with this. Abolish the salary cap. Abolish financial fair play rules. If you got money, billionaires and millionaires who own these teams, put your money up. Don't be scared. Pay for the players. Because if these European teams, especially in the WSL, if they start to really kind of take off and they start bringing in cash and they are able to sign your players away from the NWSL, don't act like a bunch of brokies out here. If you have to pay to keep the players, then pay to keep the players.
That's a great point, because it could be one transfer window or two transfer windows. Like, let's say the Champions League, I mean, we love DAZN, shout out to DAZN, but let's say somebody steps up, I don't know, let's say Netflix steps up. It's like, we want the Champions League. They already put money up for the World Cup.
Sure.
And it's not outside the realm of possibility. If you're an NWSL owner, we've got to revisit the CBA. Otherwise, we're at real risk of, what if it's take any of the top 3 or 4 players, take another 3 or 4 of the top 10 players and say, okay, what does it look like if they go out the door and then maybe they all end up in the WSL, or a couple at Barcelona, a couple at Lyon? Economically, there is a risk when a salary cap sport is essentially in competition with these non-salary capped clubs in Europe.
I might butcher the story. Feel free, anybody who knows this better, to fact check me. So I think it was Randy Lerner whose dad owned the Cleveland Browns. And so in typical oligarch fashion, he eventually owned the Cleveland Browns, and he bought Aston Villa years and years ago. And if you could believe it, a guy who was running the Cleveland Browns bought a European football club, and they almost immediately got relegated. It was like Aston Villa's worst time period. I'm talking about men's football here. And I'm almost certain I read a story that Randy Lerner was going around and talking to Premier League teams about hey, it would be a good idea if we institute a salary cap. And owners in Serie A were like, God, we hope you guys institute a salary cap. That would just be great for us. So I just think, and we talked about it with Leanne when we were on her show, the women's football show, which you should obviously subscribe to immediately, that the salary cap and these kind of rules, they often are just made to protect team owners in general. And they're not really there to help players or fans in any real way. So again, sorry to get on my soapbox for this. You got to spend. I would hope that Michelle Kang, I can see her kind of spearheading this as the owner of the Washington Spirit. Now also she's the owner of Lyon, and she is the owner of London City Lionesses, who will likely probably come up to the WSL here soon. But I would hope that Michelle Kang stands on business and goes, we have to figure this out so people don't just start poaching our players from the NWSL, because there's still great growth potential for them, for me to sound like some kind of ghoulish capitalist. But you got to pay to keep the talent, or else they're going to go where the money is.
Yeah, 100%. And shout out Saki Kumagai too, the latest London City Lioness as of the last day or so. But I'm glad you brought up the CBA, and by design, it existing to protect owners. And that's usually when there's no big competing leagues with you, you're protecting the owners from making dumb signings and just blowing a lot of money because they're pissed off because they finished in last place. In this instance, it would be protecting the value of the franchise for the owners.
Yeah.
So it's almost like a catch-22 a little bit. You want to protect owners for sure, but I mean, what good is it if the value of these franchises, the value of the league starts to fall a little bit or starts to slip a little bit because the talent's heading out the door? It's, you got to kind of balance those two. So definitely something to keep an eye on for sure.
Absolutely. Enough money talk, man. We got to talk some football again.
Let's go. 3 Champions League teams in action this weekend. A big one in London, West London, Chelsea hosting my Arsenal. I'm not sure, the league is necessarily up for grabs. I think I'm with you in the fact that the WSL maybe is a little bit of a wrap at this point. Tough to say. Only halfway through, 11 matches still to be played. Arsenal, second place, 7 points behind Chelsea, and now heading to West London to take on the champs. maybe the biggest match of the Renee Slagers era. Definitely the biggest match of the Renee Slagers permanent manager era. But you could probably make the case that the Bayern, the second Bayern match, maybe was maybe at the same level. So much work to do if Arsenal still wants to try to catch Chelsea. But both these teams, I think, in really good form. They each won their last WSL match 5-0, and each took home a League Cup win earlier this week. So a pretty good measuring stick game, I would say, Chelsea versus Arsenal. Anything you're going to be looking out for in this one?
I'm looking for more of the same, and it's going to sound like a weird answer, but you were on it pretty early that it seemed like something changed when Renee Slagers took over. Whether it's all Jonas Eidevall leaving or Renee Slagers kind of adding something to the club. But in that 5-0 win over Palace, your 5 goal scorers in that match, Leah Williamson, Alessia Russo, Beth Mead, Mariona Caldente, one of those on a penalty. That's the good stuff. Those are your great players, your leaders who need to be scoring in these matches. They're going to have to come up big against Chelsea. They're 7 points behind them in the table, 10 behind in goal differential. If you're going to have any hope, like you said, of making this a real challenge to win the league, you gotta hope for some weird Chelsea results, but you absolutely unequivocally have to find a way to squeak out a win in this one.
Yeah, totally. And I think, even squeaking out a win maybe doesn't feel like enough. Like you almost need to kind of like rough the game. We'll see, because I think Arsenal's at a slight disadvantage at pretty much every spot in the field. I hate to say it, but Chelsea's just so loaded, and they're humming at a high level right now. But that's why they play the games. This one's going down Sunday, 7:30 a.m. Eastern. Saturday, 12:30 p.m. Eastern. So not too much of a haul for you to get up and catch this one.
Mm-hmm.
The aforementioned Aston Villa will be hosting your Manchester City Sky Blues. What do we need to know about this one?
All right. So in league play, the Manchester Derby, we mentioned it earlier, not enjoyable for your boy. They did get revenge in the League Cup, a win over Manchester United there. Got to get back off the schneid, really. If you think about the Barcelona loss, I think they've actually lost 3 of their last 5. Now, speaking of dates, they're kind of like stretched out between like the Champions League and you have the holiday break and all that stuff. Sure. But still, you got to notch an important win here. Kerolin's not going to be available for this one. Gareth Taylor just spoke to that. I think it might have even been today, the day we're recording. But he did mention Bunny Shaw, Viv Miedema, who's already working her way back, and Naomi Lazelle should get some playing time versus Villa. So I'm very excited to see what Bunny looks like, especially Naomi Lazelle is not going to hurt either in that defense that I talked about that was having problems in the Manchester Derby, in the league match, where the defensive strategy, and just a tip for Gareth Taylor. So we tried the give Ella Toone a bunch of space, like 8 meters of space around her strategy. Okay, let's put in the book that strategy doesn't work. So let's try to clean that up in the defense going into Villa. But I expect a win, and I expect something relatively convincing.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, thinking back to that match, Kiera Keating, not all Kiera Keating's fault, for sure. I think her defense put her in a couple bad spots.
Yeah.
In the rematch, though, Lily Murphy,
let's go.
She showed up in a big way, goal and an assist, and looked, pretty dynamic in that one. So was glad to see them kind of dust themselves off and get a nice win there. And we'll see what they've got this weekend for Villa. Anything else you want to hit before we get out of here?
I think that's it, man. I feel like that's a comprehensive coverage of what the WSL has to offer coming up. I'm looking forward to watching the matches and then reconvening after that.
Let's go. All right, man. I think we did it. This has been another episode of Into the Channel. Thank you for watching, listening, following, liking, subscribing, commenting, just plain hanging out with your boys. And remember to like if you liked, subscribe or follow Into the Channel, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you like to watch or listen. Leave us a review over your favorite podcast app. Links to all of our socials in the show notes of this episode. And I do mean all of our socials, except for one. What are we doing about X/Twitter? I think it's got to be a wrap at this point.
I think you're probably right. I know we have a lot of pals over there. We made a lot of pals in the Brown Battalion on Twitter. Mm-hmm. If you folks are on Threads, or if you prefer Blue Sky, or if there's somewhere else, please let us know in the comments. Obviously, we're not going to lose touch with you. We can't lose touch with you. Braun is going to be in Champions League qualifying next year. So we got to make sure we reconvene to root on the battalion. So let us know. I think we're gonna walk away from X. I think we're gonna demand a transfer. I don't even know why I called it X. I hate calling it X. Twitter. I think we're gonna walk away from Twitter. We'll demand a transfer. We'll leave that part of the internet and keep it tight with our community where we can keep sharing our own joy and hope for a better world and work toward that better world.
100%. Yeah. And I'm way out on calling it X. The only X that I recognize is the late great Earl Simmons. That's X in my heart. Anyhow, your boys are out here. So connect with us on the other platforms. We want to hear from you. We love hearing from you. And a big thank you to my co-host as well, Mr. Grand Angle, for stepping in for me at the top of the show. Crushed it. Throwing fastballs and change-ups at the same time. I appreciate you, bro.
Likewise, buddy. Thank you for the kind words. I rehearsed the intro several times, tried to do what I needed to do. Let us know in the comments how shocking it was to hear my gravelly voice. Be like, what the hell is going on here? So I appreciate anybody who decided to still stick with the show, even though they heard those first few words coming from me. And we will see you all next time.